So as we continue our discussions on DC Rebirth, what we do here is we pick up with Justice League Rebirth, the Extinction Machines, which of course is the first story arc of Justice League. But if I can be bold here, now I'm going out on a limb, I'm just kind of spitballing. After going through this story arc, it feels to me like Bryan Hitch and DC are laying the foundations for another crisis. Now, I'm not going to swear to that, but that seems to be the case, right? You know, I mean, when you look at Justice League titles, you don't think of, well, they're just kind of fighting someone. You think of huge, great big events, massive things that are taking place. You know, with the New 52, when the Justice League story arc first started, they fought Darkseid, and that was basically Jeff Johns laying the groundwork for what would become Darkseid War, his hunt for his daughter Grail, which tied into the Wonder Woman mythos and all that kind of stuff, but it was always a background aspect. We saw in different titles that the Anti-Monitor actually had a name. His name was Mobius. Jeff Johns retold his whole story. It was kind of a reformation of a lot of the history in DC Comics. With what's going on right now, and Dr. Manhattan presumably having been the one to take 10 years out of everybody's life so that we don't know what happened for that 10 years before the New 52 started. With the actions of Ozymandias, or what's believed to be Ozymandias, taking Tim Drake, leaving everybody to believe that he was dead, taking Doomsday, you know, presumably after he was supposedly killed, or I guess sent to the Phantom Zone by Superman. All these things seem to lead to this big undercurrent, and it would make perfect sense that if there was going to be a big crisis, or if there was going to be some huge universe-changing event, that it would have its roots in Justice League. But again, I'm just kind of spitballing here, but what we do is we initially start off with Wonder Woman. And this is actually a pretty cool thing here. With Wonder Woman's character, it seems as though she's just going about her normal fare of, you know, being a superhero, going about her normal fare of doing superhero things. She's fighting Russians and so on and so forth, but in the midst of this conflict, there is a massive earthquake. Now, the Russian soldiers believe that she's the one that started this, but she says no, she was not the cause. Now, what we also get in this story, this is one of the things I like about Bryan Hitch's writing at this point, is he basically kind of transitions between, you know, newscasts, between what's going on with people reporting this information on television and the superheroes themselves. We jump to Beijing and we pick up with Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz. Now, with Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz, one thing to keep in mind here is that Bryan Hitch seems to be kind of walking the line between what's going on in Sam Humphrey's Green Lanterns and what's going on in this story. Of course, we had talked about in our series on Green Lanterns, the return of the Red Lanterns, that Jessica Cruz's biggest problem was that she didn't have confidence. She didn't know why she was a Green Lantern. And at the end of that story, she had created her first construct. In this story, she will create a construct as well. But Bryan Hitch doesn't really answer the question of where this resides, whether or not, you know, whether this is before or after Sam Humphrey's run. Is it in the interim? Of course, Sam Humphrey's run didn't really give us any room to believe that there were things going on between the events that we saw in each particular issue. It was all just one quick series of events that were taking place at a very fast pace. There was no indication that there was some huge planet-wide event that was going on while they were fighting the Red Lantern Corps. And so again, the answers aren't given here, but in truth, they don't really need to be. This isn't the kind of thing that people get upset about when it came to something like continuity issues. You know, this is something we can easily overlook. This is a situation like this is not as though Batman's the god of knowledge while Jim Gordon is Batman in the Batman comics. You know, it's not that kind of a problem. So again, we can just kind of skip over this, but I thought it was something a little interesting. But the fact remains here that much like what we saw with Wonder Woman, in Beijing, in New York, in these various places, there have been massive earthquakes. Now, in New York itself, Cyborg, Victor Stone, is doing what he can to rescue various civilians. In San Francisco, the Flash is rescuing various people. You know, in Atlantis, Aquaman's own home territory has seemed to be rent asunder by virtue of this giant earthquake. And what this tells us is that this earthquake, because it's happening on a global scale, does not seem to be something confined to just the simple movement of tectonic plates. It seems as though it's within the Earth itself. It's the core of the Earth itself. Now, the reason why I say this ties into Justice League Rebirth is in the Rebirth issue #1, which is to say DC coming along and saying, here's the status quo for Justice League right now going forward until we change it. We had seen the arrival of some kind of alien called a Reaper. The initial indication here was that this Reaper was a villain, that it was going through and it was kidnapping people and so on. There wasn't really any real major explanation given here. What Bryan Hitch is going to do over the course of the story is make sense of that and actually turn our concept of heroes and villains on its head in its entirety. And this is what I loved about Bryan Hitch's writing. He did such a great job doing this. But what happens is that in the midst of these earthquakes, people start popping up everywhere. Of course, the Atlanteans of Aquaman, the soldiers that Wonder Woman's fighting, all these people begin cropping up and start saying things like, our power, you're a pretender, you've stolen our power, the awakening is starting, so on and so forth. And she begins, or I guess they begin referencing something called the Kindred. Now, we don't know initially what the Kindred is, and we won't find out here for a little bit. But what we end up doing is jumping to the Justice League once these various members are able to basically rescue as many people as they can in the city. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and this is one of the things that I really enjoy about the Justice League title and about DC as a whole, is that DC does not shy away from the fact that some people were killed. Now, they don't usually show like their gruesome deaths, but they do acknowledge the fact that the Justice League couldn't save everybody. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say that the Justice League doesn't care, you know, that Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz or Barry Allen or Wonder Woman say, well, we did what we can and that's it. Oh, well, sometimes you just can't save everyone. I mean, the cool thing about this is it builds on them. You know, they look at this and they say, well, we couldn't save everybody, and it affects them on an emotional level, which is still a pretty cool concept. But what Batman's also done is he's discovered what appears to be a giant artifact or a parasite within the city of Gotham. Now, this parasite seems to be sending out smaller parasites of its own, which are grabbing people, and it appears as though they're either taking them away or they're enslaving them. We're not 100% sure yet. But from here, we actually end up finding Aquaman. We travel back to Atlantis, and Aquaman discovers what are called Zodiac stones. Now, again, this is why I say a lot of these things are divergent stories. They're stories that do not seem to be related. So if things seem kind of disheveled up to this point, it's designed to be that way. With regards to this story, Brian Hitch very much takes a miniature version of the Jonathan Hickman approach, when Hickman takes all these different stories that seem totally unrelated and then ties them all together at the very end. That's why I think, I know a lot of people didn't care for Justice League too much, but I think this was a great story. It was really well done the way it was written. But the fact remains here that, you know, with everything that's happened so far, the Justice League does what it normally does. You know, they go back to the Watchtower, and the question is, okay, what's going on? How do we fix this? What caused these massive earthquakes? And what in the heck is that thing in Gotham City? But before they're able to explore any further, of course, the alarms start going off, and they realize that this organism that arrived in Gotham City is only one, and there are thousands that are descending upon the planet Earth. In addition to this, we also see these various individuals, these normal humans who have been entranced or taken over, saying things like the purge is coming, or the purge has come, that more must be awakened, that everyone must be awakened, that the kindred must rise. This is Hitch toying with us with regards to this. Now, in the end, these Zodiac stones, you know, seem to have an impact on individuals. You know, people who are exposed to them or imbued with them take on another form. But something that I also want to draw your attention to, and this is one of the things that I liked the most about this, is the conversation between Superman and Batman. Now, we know that in the New 52, that Batman and the New 52 Superman, it took time for them to form their relationship. It took time for them to form their trust. Batman never really trusts anybody, but the New 52 Superman got as close as a person can be to Batman trusting them. And so with the arrival of the pre-New 52 Superman to take the place of the New 52 Superman, Batman doesn't really trust him because, again, when the pre-New 52 Superman showed up, he didn't tell anyone he was there. He was hidden. He was watching the New 52 Justice League take on Darkseid in that story arc. He was watching all these events unfold, and it wasn't until the New 52 Superman died that he made his presence known, that he allowed people to realize that he does exist. And so again, in their mind, while it isn't necessarily a betrayal of trust, the pre-New 52 Superman hasn't really done any favors for Batman to earn his trust in the first place. So again, the issue with this though is that Superman is Superman, and Superman can do things that the other superheroes can't do. Wonder Woman is very formidable in her own right, but Wonder Woman is a warrior. She will do what she needs to do, but she's best suited taking on massive amounts of enemies at one time. Batman has his intellect. Barry Allen is extremely fast, but he needs a surface to run on. Victor Stone has his own capabilities in terms of being able to access machines and so on, and of course the Green Lanterns can form their own constructs. But the issue with this is that Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz are nowhere near as experienced as Hal Jordan, and so the issue, or I guess the main focus, is that Superman needs to go inside the planet and find out what had caused these massive earthquakes. And so what happens is we basically end up jumping forward a bit, and we pick up with Russia, and we find that some massive entity has basically come into existence that's referring to itself as the Kindred. And so what Hitch does is that when Wonder Woman goes after this particular entity, once all these various people have kind of emerged and conglomerated into a singular being to make up this giant humanoid form, Wonder Woman is basically exposed to it and dives into it. Now, this is why I say things get a little crazy here. They get a little kooky, because what Brian Hitch is doing is he's basically saying these giant humanoids are an amalgamation of normal humans. These various humans that have been taken over are merging together into a singular being to make up this giant humanoid form. But again, he still toys with us. He doesn't tell us everything that's going on. And so for the most part, the Justice League, or I guess the remnants of the Justice League, end up going against and trying to take out these various aliens and these various forces that seem to be carrying human beings off. But for Superman, we also recognize that with this pre-New 52 Superman, family is one of the most important things. Now keep in mind, this seems to take place around the time of Son of Superman, so I mean, just off the top of my head, I can't remember which one comes first, but the fact remains here that Clark Kent's son, you know, Jonathan Kent, still plays a major role in his life. So just flying off and going to the center of the earth is not something he would do. Now, if this was the New 52 Superman, he would take off immediately, no questions asked. But for pre-New 52 Superman, he has to talk to Lois, he has to talk to Jonathan, he has to make sure they know what's going on. And I like this because Hitch builds on our view of Superman. He builds on this concept. He says, look, this is not the New 52 Superman, this is the pre-New 52 Superman. He has a family to take care of, but his family is just as much a foundation and a part of his reasoning for becoming a superhero as simply just saving the world as often as he can. And so for Batman, you know, there are more important things here. The most important thing is trying to save the planet Earth as best they can. Now, Superman recognizes this, but the other cool thing is that Lois Lane is not necessarily happy about the fact that he's going to leave. And the reason why, for those of you guys who are curious, is this is the pre-New 52 Lois Lane, Superman, so on. So she was there when Superman was killed by Doomsday, you know, in the original Superman versus Doomsday storyline. She watched her husband die, believed he was dead, and then was there when he came back to life. For her, that was a crushing experience because she believed that she had lost the man that she loved forever. And so the issue with her is that while she is strong, while she is confident, while she does have it where it counts, in the end, Superman flying off as part of the Justice League always presents a scenario where he may die. And that's not something that she wants to live with at any point in time. And so the discussion here is do what you need to do, save the world, do the best you can, but you damn well better come back alive. And so what Cyborg does is he basically transitions over to their location and says, hey, look, things are going absolutely crazy here. Things are going insane. We have to do something. And so Superman basically goes to the center of the world. Now, this is kind of funny. I actually like this, the way that this is done, because as far as we know, this is the first time Superman has ever been in the core of Earth in the New 52, and he simply was not prepared for it. Now, there have been stories where Superman has gone to the center of the world on several occasions. That's not unheard of. Our thought would be, well, it's not necessarily solar energy. The Earth stores solar energy, so on and so forth, absorbing energies of the sun. So that largely gets stuck in the atmosphere. But the idea here is that Superman is effectively surrounded by super hot metals. And so the question is, can Superman melt? Would Superman be killed if he stayed in the core of the Earth for too long of amount of time? How would that affect him? And this is why this is cool, because what this does is it creates another weakness for Superman. If someone were wanting to incapacitate him, they could basically expose him to red kryptonite or to green kryptonite, reduce his powers, and then store him in the center of the Earth. And it would basically erode his abilities, or it would keep him weak because of the fact that the solar energy of the sun cannot penetrate down into the center of the Earth. And so this is one of the things that I like so much about what Hitch is doing, is because it's the small things that make all the difference in a good story. It's saying this instead of saying that. It's doing this instead of doing that makes stories great. And so what we do is we end up picking back up with Wonder Woman. And this is when we start to get an explanation. We start to get some understanding of what's going on with the Kindred. Now, the questions that she asks here are, I guess this scenario is a perfect example of asking the wrong questions. But for those of you guys who don't know, in Marvel Comics, you have what's called the Infinity Well, and it's within the realm of Mistress Death. And the Infinity Well was used by Thanos, which is how he found the Infinity Gauntlet, or learned about the Infinity Gauntlet in the first place. But the Infinity Well is one of those aspects where you have to ask it the right question in order to get the answer that you're looking for. It's much the same way in this situation with Wonder Woman. Now, I don't mean to do a comparison between Marvel and DC. It was simply the best example I could think of at this particular point in time. But the fact remains here that while she's trying to figure this out, while she's asking the question, who are you? What is the Kindred? The Kindred's asking her the same thing. Who are you? What are you? And so neither seems to know what the other is. More so than that, the Kindred doesn't seem to know anything about the superheroes on Earth. It's simply just, these are beings on a planet. And so what we also learn is that these Kindred represent different facets of the world. One of the Kindred was able to steal the speed of Barry Allen. Another Kindred was able to steal the powers of the Green Lanterns, the Atlantean strength. All of these different aspects have merged into 4 different iterations of the Kindred, and what they seem to be doing is singing a song. What they seem to be doing is awakening. And so while this may seem a little bit confusing, fortunately for us, Hitch provides us with a good explanation on what in the world is going on. what we do is we end up picking up again with the Green Lanterns doing the best they can to hold off these various forces. Now, when I say that the Kindred, when I say they stole the powers of the Green Lantern, they didn't really steal them per se. I guess it'd be best to say they were able to copy them, or they were able to use them. They didn't absorb them in their entirety. We know that because the superheroes are still fighting. But what happens is Victor Stone, because of his ability to tap into organisms, to be able to read hive minds as well as technological artifacts, he begins tapping into these organisms. And when he does, he reads what it is that their intentions are, and he simply just replies by saying that all of them are screwed. And so again, this is Hitch toying with us. This is Hitch, just kind of screwing with us and messing around and saying, don't worry, the answers are coming, the answers will be there, just relax, just chill out a little bit. And so again, we pick back up with Superman. And the cool thing is we actually get this really great argument between Lois Lane and Batman. And this is so great because it gives Lois such great character. And I think it's necessary because I think one of the things that's always been kind of lacking when it came to the character of Lois Lane, in the New 52 is, yes, she had character, but she had character where she was kind of defiant. She had character where she was kind of going about and doing her own thing. But I always wanted to see the angry tirade of Lois Lane as the wife of Superman, concerned about his life. And she takes this out on Batman. She says, look, Superman, yes, he's a hero. Yes, he has to save the world, but he has a family. He has important things to come back to. In addition to this, Batman is a little hesitant about whether or not Superman will actually succeed. And again, this ties into the fact that Batman doesn't quite trust Superman. And this is the entire basis behind Lois Lane's anger. She trusts her husband. For her, Superman is the Superman. There will never be another Superman on the same level as her husband. And so she knows that no matter what happens, even if it means giving his life, he will do what needs to be done. And again, this is really just Brian Hitch in DC hearkening back to the 1992 Death of Superman story, saying he gave his life to try to defeat one of the most formidable villains that have ever arrived in DC Comics and save the world. And so for Lois Lane, for Batman to come along and to say, hey, look, your husband might not succeed, we need another plan, it's the ultimate offense. It's one of the most egregious things that he could do because it's basically saying, yeah, your husband's died before, but your husband's not what he used to be. And it's Lois Lane saying, you're full of hoo-ha juice. That's not the case. My husband Superman is every ounce the hero that I believe he is, and he will save the day, even if it means costing his life in the process. And so what we do is we jump back to Wonder Woman. And Wonder Woman is again continuing her conversation with the Kindred. She's still talking to the Kindred about who they are, about what they are. And what I like about this, what's cool about this, is the Kindred are asking her questions as she's asking them questions. But more so than that, she asks, who are you? And the question they ask her is, who are you? And she says, well, I'm Wonder Woman. I'm Diana Prince. But they keep asking her, who are you? And the question they have is, if you don't know yourself, how could you understand us? And so when she begins to realize what it is that they're asking, she says, I'm looking for truth. I am truth. And so she basically embodies the pursuit of truth at this particular moment. And this is Hitch telling us that the Kindred, in terms of how they view themselves, don't view themselves as average people. They view themselves as constructs, as concepts. If a member of the Kindred is truth, it represents the search for truth. If a member of the Kindred is a lie, it represents the search for lies. If they represent concepts, they don't necessarily represent something solid or tangible, if that makes any sense. But the idea, according to what the Kindred are telling Wonder Woman, is that they have been here for a long time. They've been in the universe for quite some time. And it's only now that they have the opportunity to rise, to basically awaken, to bring about the beginning of the end. And this is why I say Brian Hitch really seems to be touching at the notion of a crisis. But before we get into that, what we do is we jump back to Superman, and what he finds during his explorations in the core of the Earth is that there are basically these little doomsday devices that have been planted inside there. And the idea is to basically lead to the destruction of the Earth. Now, this is something that I want you to pay special attention to, because as we get towards the end of this video, we're going to find that not everything is as it seems. But what happens is, transitioning back to Wonder Woman is basically this concept whereby she's dealing with this Kindred while they're singing. And the idea here seems to be the total eradication of everything to bring about this purge, so to speak. And so one of the funny things, or one of the interesting aspects, is that while Simon Baz and while Jessica Cruz are out, while they're on the moon and while they're trying to fight against these various forces, they come across what appears to be the armies of these people who have just kind of been taken, and they all seem to have been modified to look almost identical to Victor Stone himself, to Cyborg. Now, this speaks volumes, because what this seems to tell us is that Victor Stone is not the first of its kind, that there have been a lot of people besides Victor Stone that have taken on that appearance, or it could simply be that Victor Stone is designed to be a harbinger of things to come. But the fact remains here that as we pick up with the conclusion of the story, as we pick up with the end, we basically join with Aquaman as he's again continuing to try to figure out what's going on on with these Zodiac stones. We pick up with the Justice League, the various members, while they're trying to understand everything that's happening, while Victor Stone tries to understand what this purge really means, while they're trying to piece together all these different things. Superman is dealing with these doomsday devices in the core of the Earth. Barry Allen seems to be losing his powers or having his powers stripped away when he says that his powers have been taken in their entirety. And that's basically what's happening here. The Kindred, at this point, now seem to be going through and absorbing the abilities of a lot of people, virtually every superhero on the planet Earth. And again, this is when things start to come to fruition. This is when things begin to make sense. What Bryan Hitch does is he gives us this end-all be-all discussion. And what he tells us is that the organism, that giant alien thing that we saw in Justice League Rebirth, was actually there to help. It was not there to hurt. But because of the fact that it showed up and immediately started whisking people away, led the Justice League to believe that it was somehow a villain, that it was an organism seeking destruction. When this happened a second time at the beginning of this story, when those thousands of organisms began showing up and began grabbing people, it was designed to take those people away, to remove them from the planet Earth. And the reason why they were designed to remove them from the Earth is because the Kindred are harbingers. The Kindred are harbingers for the next Big Bang, for the collapse of the universe, for the end of all things, allowing everything to start anew. And that was the purpose of their song. As this begins to come to an end, as this story starts to wrap up, what we learn is that the Kindred were singing the song and sending a signal out to the Big Bang, basically saying it's now time to begin the collapse of the universe, basically saying that we're now on borrowed time, that the Justice League, the universe as itself, seems to have a small amount of time left. Now again, I have no idea what direction it is that Bryan Hitch or DC are going to go with this, but the indication here seems to be that we're now on a ticking clock. We now have a certain amount of time, and when the clock strikes 0, everything will collapse in on itself. But again, like I said, I'm just kind of spitballing here. You know, this is just kind of my interpretation on how things are going. It could be the next story arc will follow up and it'll see it to its conclusion. The Justice League fly off to the far side of the universe and everything's, you know, everything's happy and everything works out. But it would seem to me that this is laying the groundwork for this collapse, for what Dr. Manhattan is going to do and kind of remake everything, maybe converge both the New 52 and the pre-New 52 universes into a singular whole, giving us one cohesive continuity going forward with a whole bunch of origin stories and different things like that, telling us where things stand. Because right now, I don't know how many of you guys have noticed, but right now we're kind of in this middle ground with DC Rebirth, right? We've got a combination of New 52, we've kind of got a combination of pre-New 52, but people have just kind of been shoved into different situations by virtue of the circumstances, and it's just kind of like different pieces kind of being put in a puzzle, you know? It's like having, you know, a patchwork quilt as opposed to one quilt composed of a singular color. And so I imagine that if they end up doing a Crisis later on based on this, that we may see, you know, something else come to fruition. I'm not really sure here, but if you guys enjoyed this story, let me know. I personally thought it was great. I really liked it, but that's because by the time I got done, I didn't really see it as a story arc in and of itself. I saw it as laying the groundwork for something else later on. But if you guys enjoy videos like these, if you guys want to see more DC Rebirth, make sure you hit the like button, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. And again, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think about the first story arc, Extinction Machines of Justice League Rebirth. And I will catch you guys later. Peace.